The mist still hovered close to the ground when he gripped the handles of the makeshift cart firmly. The creaking of the wheels broke the silence of the damp forest. The girl, with her braided hair and distant gaze, remained motionless, as if she had already understood everything, including what had not yet been said. The man wearing an expensive overcoat maintained a petrified expression, trying to hide the turmoil behind his decision. He didn't say a word. He simply released the reins of the cart, turned around and disappeared among the pine trees. Eleanor Sullivan was 10 years old, but her eyes seemed to carry the weariness of decades, wheelchair-bound since the age of 5. After a rare and silent neurological disease, she never felt her legs again. Her mother, Victoria, had mysteriously vanished years before, and her father, William Sullivan, an influential businessman from Berkshire County, Massachusetts, seemed increasingly impatient with his daughter's presence in his meticulously controlled routine. For him, this wasn't abandonment but a necessary decision, as he had written in a letter locked away in his desk drawer. The morning had started like any other at the Sullivan estate. William had instructed Eleanor's nurse, Martha, to prepare the girl for a special trip. Martha, who had grown attached to the quiet, observant child over the years, felt something was wrong. "Mr. Sullivan, may I ask where you're taking her?" she had ventured to ask, as she helped Eleanor into a warm coat. "That's none of your concern," William had replied curtly. "Your services won't be needed after today. I've arranged for more specialized care." Martha had tried to protest, but the cold glare from her employer silenced her immediately. She knelt beside Eleanor, brushing a strand of chestnut hair from the girl's pale face. "Be brave, sweetheart," she whispered, pressing a small wooden horse figurine into the girl's hand. "Remember what I told you about strength." Eleanor had nodded silently, clutching the figurine tightly. She had watched her father dismiss Martha, had felt the tension in his grip as he wheeled her to his expensive SUV, and had noted the unfamiliar path they took, away from town, deeper into the wooded areas that surrounded their property. No one at the mansion dared to contradict his orders. The nursing team had been dismissed weeks before, Eleanor's access limited and external contacts rigidly supervised. Little by little, the forest had become the only possible destination. The journey had been silent. William kept his eyes fixed on the road, occasionally glancing at his rearview mirror as if expecting to be followed. When they reached a clearing several miles into the forest, he stopped the vehicle. Without explanation, he unfolded a rustic cart he had hidden in the trunk days before, lifted Eleanor from her wheelchair and placed her on the wooden surface. The wheelchair itself he left in the SUV. "You'll be fine here," were his only words as he began pulling the cart deeper into the woods. Eleanor didn't cry or protest. She simply watched the trees passing by, memorizing shapes, sounds, and smells. Her father's breathing grew heavier as they ventured further from the road. Finally, he stopped in a small clearing protected by towering pines. What William Sullivan didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Eleanor, despite her silence and immobility, had developed an acute sensitivity to perceive the world around her. She memorized sounds, smells, subtleties, and even amid the dampness of the forest, the cold that penetrated her skin, there was something inside her that refused to disappear. The conviction that this was not the end. As William disappeared among the trees, Eleanor closed her eyes. She listened to the fading sound of his footsteps, the distant slam of his car door, and finally, the engine growing fainter until silence returned to the forest. Only then did she open her eyes again, taking in her surroundings with deliberate care. The cart had been positioned beside a fallen log. Around her, the forest stretched in every direction, beautiful but imposing. Above, patches of grey sky peeked through the canopy of branches. Eleanor reached into her coat pocket, feeling the wooden horse figurine Martha had given her. "Strength isn't in the legs, it's in the soul," Martha had often told her. Now alone in the vastness of the Berkshire woods, those words echoed in her mind. Her father had abandoned her, but something told Eleanor that her story was far from over. As the day progressed, Eleanor took inventory of her resources. Martha, perhaps suspecting something, had slipped extra items into her coat pockets. A small pocket knife, matches in a waterproof case, a chocolate bar, and a tiny compass. The overcoat itself was warm and waterproof. On the cart, her father had left a thin blanket, perhaps the only concession to his conscience. Eleanor studied the compass, noting the directions. If she remembered correctly from the maps in her father's study, there should be a road to the east, perhaps 2 miles away. But how would she, a girl unable to walk, navigate that distance? As the shadows lengthened and the forest grew colder, Eleanor pulled the blanket around her shoulders. Her mind, always quick and resourceful, began forming plans. She wouldn't give up. She couldn't. Somewhere out there, answers awaited about her father's decision, about her mother's disappearance, and about her own destiny. The first twist of fate came at dawn. A metallic, rhythmic sound emerged from the distance. They weren't human footsteps, nor tires. It was the trot of a horse. But it wasn't just any horse. It was a white animal with a coat as clear as snow, customarily used by the neighboring farm. The horse, which had escaped weeks earlier after an accidental fire, seemed attracted to something. It approached the cart with an almost human calmness, as if it recognized the girl. Eleanor's heart raced as she heard the approaching hoofbeats. Through the morning mist, she saw it. A magnificent white stallion, its coat gleaming like pearls. In the early light, the horse, curious and seemingly unafraid, approached her cart slowly. Eleanor remained still, hardly daring to breathe. When the horse was just a few feet away, she extended her hand, palm up. "Hello there," she whispered. The horse sniffed her hand, then pressed its velvety muzzle against her palm. A connection formed between them, silent but profound. As if understanding her predicament, the horse lowered itself to the ground beside the cart. Eleanor stared in amazement. Was this actually happening, or had the cold and fear affected her mind? The horse remained there, lying beside her, its intelligent eyes fixed on her face. It was then that Eleanor saw the rope attached to the horse's halter, a long, sturdy lead rope that someone had failed to remove when the animal escaped. In that moment, a plan began to form in her mind. Using the pocket knife from Martha, Eleanor cut the thin ropes that tied the blanket to the cart. With tremendous effort, she began to fashion a makeshift harness. Her hands, always dexterous despite her condition, worked quickly. The horse, in inexplicable docility, remained beside her, occasionally nickering softly as if encouraging her efforts. Hours passed as Eleanor worked, her determination growing with each knot she tied. The makeshift harness wouldn't win any equestrian awards, but it might just work. The question was, would the horse accept it? And even if it did, could she manage to guide it toward help? Eleanor looked up at the patches of sky visible through the trees. The sun had risen higher now, burning away the morning mist. She took a deep breath. "It's now or never," she whispered to herself. With the harness complete, she turned her attention to the horse, which had now stood up and was grazing nearby. She whistled softly, the way she'd seen ranch hands do on nature documentaries. The white stallion lifted its head, regarding her with curious eyes. "Come here, boy," Eleanor called gently. "I need your help." To her amazement, the horse approached once more. It stood patiently as she reached up from her cart to secure the makeshift harness around its strong neck and back. Using the rope as reins and the last of her strength, Eleanor pulled herself from the cart onto the horse's back. The position was awkward and painful. Without the use of her legs, balance was nearly impossible. But Eleanor had learned long ago that determination could overcome many obstacles. With the rope gripped firmly in her hands, she leaned forward, pressing her body against the horse's warm neck. "East," she whispered, tugging the rope gently in that direction. "Take me east." The horse seemed to understand. With a gentle gait that minimized the jarring of Eleanor's body, it began walking through the forest, heading east according to the small compass still clutched in Eleanor's hand. Trees passed by, streams were carefully crossed, and all the while Eleanor held on, her body aching, but her spirit soaring with each step that took her away from the clearing where she had been abandoned. The morning sun climbed higher as horse and rider continued their slow journey eastward. Eleanor's arms burned with the effort of holding herself in place, but she refused to give up. Somewhere ahead lay a road, and on that road, perhaps, would come the next chapter of her story. The second twist of fate occurred when the horse not only approached, but stopped before her and lay down on the ground. It was there, between instinct and the improbable, that Eleanor began to think about possibilities. With painstaking effort and the last reserves of her strength, Eleanor had managed to stay on the white horse's back as it carried her through the forest. The journey seemed endless, each minute stretching into what felt like hours as she clung to the animal's mane, her body aching from the unusual position. But Eleanor Sullivan had long ago learned the value of patience and perseverance. When the trees finally began to thin and the distant rumble of vehicles became audible, Eleanor felt a surge of hope. They emerged onto the edge of a rural highway. The morning traffic was light, just occasional trucks and cars passing by. Eleanor guided the horse to remain partially hidden in the tree line while she considered her options. Who could she trust? Her father's influence in Berkshire County was considerable. If she flagged down the wrong person, she might find herself right back where she started, or worse, return to her father. As she deliberated, a battered pickup truck slowed to a stop on the shoulder about 50 yards away. A young man in overalls stepped out, looking at something under the hood. Smoke billowed from the engine. Eleanor studied him from her hiding place. There was something vaguely familiar about his profile. She urged the horse forward slightly, trying to get a better look. The movement caught the young man's attention. He straightened, his expression changing from frustration to astonishment, as he spotted the white horse with a small girl clinging to its back at the edge of the forest. "What in the world?" he muttered, stepping away from his truck. As he drew closer, recognition dawned on his face. "You're the Sullivan girl, aren't you?" Eleanor's heart raced. Should she flee? But where would she go? And her strength was nearly depleted. She nodded cautiously. The young man approached slowly, hands slightly raised as if to show he meant no harm. "I'm Ethan Miller. I used to work at your father's company." Now Eleanor recognized him. Ethan had been a junior mechanic at Sullivan Industries, her father's manufacturing business. She recalled seeing him occasionally when her father would take her to the factory, before her illness progressed, and William began keeping her hidden away from public view. "What are you doing out here alone?" Ethan asked, his voice a mixture of concern and confusion, and on a horse no less. Eleanor hesitated. Could she trust this man? Her father had fired dozens of employees in recent months in what he called a necessary restructuring. What if Ethan harbored resentment and would use her as leverage? But the genuine concern in his eyes and the gentleness in his approach swayed her. Besides, she had few options. "My father left me in the forest," she said simply, her voice hoarse from disuse. Ethan's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to anger. "He what?" Eleanor nodded toward the woods behind her. "Yesterday, he took me deep into the forest and left me there on a cart." She patted the white horse's neck. "This horse found me this morning. I managed to get on his back." Ethan ran a hand through his dark hair, processing this information. "Jesus," he muttered. "Why would he—" He stopped himself, studying Eleanor's pale face. "Never mind that now. You must be exhausted and cold. Let me help you." He stepped closer to the horse, which remained remarkably calm. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward Eleanor. She nodded, and Ethan carefully lifted her from the horse's back. Her legs hung limply as he carried her to his truck. "Your truck broke down," Eleanor observed, glancing at the smoking hood. Ethan grimaced. "Yeah, radiator issue. I was on my way to my shift at Miller's Auto Shop. That's where I work now after your father's company let me go. I can call for a tow, though." He settled Eleanor in the passenger seat, then returned for the horse, tying its lead rope to the truck's side mirror temporarily. "What's the plan for your four-legged friend here?" Eleanor looked at the white stallion, feeling a surge of affection. "I don't know. He saved me. I can't just leave him." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "My uncle has a small farm about 5 miles from here. Maybe we can take him there for now?" He pulled out his cell phone. "First things first, though. We need to get help." Eleanor's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. No police, she said firmly. No authorities. Not yet. Ethan frowned. Eleanor, what your father did... I know what he did, she interrupted. And there's more you don't. No, please, Ethan. I need time to figure things out. If official channels get involved now, my father will twist the story. He always does. The intensity in her eyes gave Ethan pause. He lowered his phone. Okay, he said slowly. No authorities, for now. But I need to call for a tow, and we need to get you somewhere safe and warm. Eleanor nodded, releasing his wrist. Thank you. As Ethan made his calls, Eleanor stared out the window at the forest that had nearly become her tomb. Despite everything, a small part of her felt more alive than she had in years. For the first time since her mother disappeared, she was outside her father's control. It was terrifying, but also exhilarating. Ethan's uncle, Jack Miller, arrived 30 minutes later with a horse trailer attached to his own truck. He was a weathered man in his 60s, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He asked few questions, seeming to sense the delicacy of the situation. Together, he and Ethan managed to coax the white horse into the trailer. Beautiful animal, Jack commented. Quarter horse, I'd say. Someone's going to be looking for him. He found me, Eleanor said from the passenger seat of Ethan's truck. I think he might have been abandoned too. Jack's eyebrows rose, but he didn't press for details. Well, he's welcome at my place until we figure things out. The tow truck arrived shortly after. While Ethan handled the arrangements for his vehicle, Jack helped Eleanor into his truck. Ethan mentioned you might need a place to stay for a bit, he said casually. Our house isn't fancy, but my wife Mary makes the best apple pie in the county, and we've got a spare room that doesn't see much use these days. Eleanor studied the older man, trying to gauge his intentions. There was nothing but sincerity in his weathered face. That's very kind of you, she said. I won't be a burden. I just need some time. Jack nodded. Time we've got plenty of. And don't you worry about being a burden. Mary's been complaining the house is too quiet since our daughter moved to Chicago. By mid-afternoon, Eleanor found herself in the Millers' cozy farmhouse on the outskirts of a small town called Meadowbrook, about 20 miles from her father's estate. Mary Miller, a plump woman with silver-streaked brown hair, had welcomed her without hesitation, asking no questions beyond whether she was hungry or cold. The spare room was small but comfortable, with a hand-stitched quilt on the bed and faded floral wallpaper. Through the window, Eleanor could see the white horse grazing contentedly in a paddock. He seems to like it here, Mary commented, setting a tray with milk and cookies on the bedside table. Jack says he's never seen a horse settle in so quickly. Eleanor smiled. He's special. Mary sat on the edge of the bed. Ethan told us a little about your situation, she said gently. Not details, just that you needed a safe place for a while. I want you to know that you're welcome here for as long as you need. Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes. After months of increasing isolation at her father's estate, such simple kindness felt overwhelming. Thank you, she whispered. Mary patted her hand. Rest now. We can talk more when you're ready. After Mary left, Eleanor turned toward the window again, watching the white horse. From this new sanctuary, her mind began working on the puzzle of her circumstances. Why had her father abandoned her now, after years of keeping her hidden away? What had changed? And most importantly, what had happened to her mother? Victoria Sullivan's disappearance 3 years ago had been briefly investigated, then, quietly, closed. William had told everyone she had decided to seek treatment for depression in a private European facility. But Eleanor had never believed that story. Her mother, despite her struggles after Eleanor's diagnosis, had been determined to see her daughter grow up strong and independent. She would never have left voluntarily. As the afternoon waned into evening, Eleanor found herself drafting mental lists. She needed information about her father's businesses, about her mother's disappearance, about the changes in her father's behavior over the past year, and she needed to be careful. William Sullivan was a powerful man with connections throughout the county. If he discovered where she was, he would either force her return or ensure she was permanently silenced in some other way. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Ethan entered, carrying a small duffel bag. "Hey," he said, "I brought you some things. My cousin Lisa is about your age. Aunt Mary called her mom and got permission to borrow some clothes for you." Eleanor accepted the bag gratefully. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." He shrugged, but his eyes were serious. "No one deserves what happened to you. I want to help." Eleanor studied him. "Why? My father fired you. You have no reason to help me." Ethan sat in the chair by the window. "Your father fired a lot of people, including me, but that's not your fault." He hesitated. "Besides, there were things happening at Sullivan Industries that didn't sit right with me. Things I couldn't prove, but, well, let's just say I'm not surprised your father is capable of abandoning his own daughter." Eleanor leaned forward. "What things?" Ethan glanced toward the door, then lowered his voice. "Financial irregularities, suspicious shipping manifests, environmental violations that were covered up. I tried to raise concerns through proper channels, but I was shut down. 2 weeks later, I was part of a company-wide restructuring." This information confirmed suspicions Eleanor had harbored for months. Her father's late-night meetings, the increasing security at the estate, his insistence that Eleanor remain out of sight when certain business associates visited. "I need to know more," she said firmly, "about everything." Ethan hesitated. "It could be dangerous. Your father has influence in this county." "I'm already in danger," Eleanor pointed out. "He left me to perish in the forest. What could be more dangerous than that?" Ethan couldn't argue with her logic. "Okay," he said finally. "I still have some contacts at Sullivan Industries, people who trust me. I'll see what I can find out." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Eleanor, there's something else you should know. About a month before I was fired, I overheard your father on the phone. He was talking about your mother." Eleanor's heart raced. "What did he say?" "I only caught part of the conversation, but he said, 'She's contained. As long as the payments continue, there won't be any problems.'" Eleanor's mind whirled with implications. Contained, payments. Could her mother be alive somewhere, held against her will? "Thank you for telling me," she said, her voice steady despite the tumult of emotions within. "This changes everything." After Ethan left, Eleanor stared out the window at the darkening sky. The white horse was still visible in the paddock, its pale coat gleaming in the twilight. Like a beacon of hope in her suddenly chaotic world, her father had made a grave miscalculation when he left her in that forest. He had assumed her physical limitations defined her capabilities. He had forgotten, or perhaps never understood, that Eleanor Sullivan had inherited her mother's intelligence and determination. Now, with unexpected allies and a newfound sense of purpose, Eleanor was ready to discover the truth about her father, about her mother, and about herself. The game had changed, and for the first time in years, Eleanor held cards her father didn't know about. The third twist came when Eleanor managed, with extreme difficulty, to make the horse take her to the main road. There she found a young mechanic who had recently been fired from her father's company, victim of a cold and abrupt personnel cut. Upon recognizing her, the young man hesitated, but seeing her condition and the clarity in Eleanor's eyes, he couldn't resist. A week had passed since Eleanor's arrival at the Miller farm. The routine that developed gave her a sense of stability she hadn't experienced in years. Each morning, Mary helped her bathe and dress, treating Eleanor's disability with matter-of-fact practicality rather than the clinical detachment of the nurses at her father's estate. Jack had modified an old wheelchair he found in their attic, making it more comfortable for Eleanor's needs. In the afternoons, she spent hours with the white horse, which the Millers now simply called Spirit. Eleanor preferred this name too. It seemed fitting for the animal that had carried her to freedom. During this time, Ethan had been quietly gathering information. His former colleagues at Sullivan Industries were reluctant to speak at first, but many harbored resentments against William Sullivan that eventually loosened their tongues. On the 8th day, Ethan arrived at the farm with a small leather backpack. "I need to show you something," he told Eleanor, as he wheeled her to the shade of an old oak tree that overlooked the paddock where Spirit grazed. Ethan glanced around to ensure they were alone, then unzipped the backpack. "One of the accounting clerks smuggled these out for me," he explained, pulling out a manila folder filled with photocopied documents. "Financial records from the last 3 years. And this," he produced a small notebook with a worn black cover, "was found in your mother's desk after she disappeared. The office manager kept it instead of turning it over to your father." Eleanor's hands trembled as she accepted the notebook. The handwriting inside was unmistakably her mother's, elegant cursive that flowed across the pages. "I haven't read it," Ethan said. "It didn't feel right, but I thought you should have it." As Eleanor began to skim the journal's contents, her face paled. Victoria Sullivan had been meticulously documenting irregularities in her husband's business practices for months before her disappearance. Shell companies, environmental violations, tax evasion, and suspicious connections with local officials. It was all there in her precise handwriting. "My mother knew," Eleanor whispered. "She was gathering evidence against him." Ethan nodded grimly. "That's what I suspected. The timing of her disappearance always seemed convenient for your father." Eleanor continued reading, turning pages with increasing urgency until she reached an entry dated just 2 days before her mother vanished. "I've confirmed my suspicions about the Evergreen property," Victoria had written. "William is using it to hide assets and conduct business that would never pass regulatory scrutiny. I've secured documentation in the hidden compartment. If anything happens to me, E will need this evidence." Eleanor looked up at Ethan, her eyes wide. "E, that's me. She left evidence somewhere for me to find." She flipped back through the journal, searching for references to the Evergreen property. "It's a hunting lodge," she explained to Ethan, "about 30 miles from here, deep in the woods. My father rarely uses it, or at least that's what he told us. I've only been there once years ago before I got sick." Ethan frowned. "If your mother hid evidence there, chances are your father found it and destroyed it." "Maybe not," Eleanor said thoughtfully. "The hidden compartment she mentions, there was a secret room at the lodge. My mother showed it to me during our visit. It was behind a bookcase in the library, like something from a mystery novel. She said it was our special secret, that not even my father knew about it." She closed the journal, her mind racing. "I need to get to that lodge, Ethan. The evidence might still be there." Ethan's expression was skeptical. "Even if it is, the lodge probably has security. And how would we explain your presence if someone saw us? Your father must be looking for you by now." Eleanor nodded. "You're right. We need to be strategic about this." She gazed at Spirit, who had wandered closer to the fence, as if sensing the intensity of their conversation. "And I need to learn more about what happened to my mother." The answer came that evening in the form of an unexpected visitor. Eleanor was in the Millers' living room, watching the local news with Jack and Mary, when a report about her own disappearance appeared on screen. William Sullivan, looking appropriately distraught, was appealing to the public for information about his vulnerable daughter, who had wandered away from home during a moment of confusion on the part of her caretaker. A substantial reward was offered for information leading to her safe return. "That lying snake," Mary muttered, her usual gentle demeanor hardening as she glanced at Eleanor. "Wandered away my foot." Jack muted the television. "You're safe. Here, Eleanor. No one in town will turn you in. William Sullivan might have money, but he doesn't have friends, not real ones." Before Eleanor could respond, a knock at the door startled them all. Jack moved to answer it, but Mary placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Let me," she said quietly, moving to peek through the curtain. Her tense shoulders relaxed. "It's Sarah," she told her husband. Ethan must have called her. The woman who entered moments later was tall and slender, with sharp features and alert eyes that immediately found Eleanor. "So it's true," she said softly. "You're alive." Mary made the introductions. "Eleanor, this is Sarah Chen. She writes for the Meadowbrook Chronicle now, but she used to work for your father too." "I was your mother's assistant," Sarah clarified, taking a seat across from Eleanor, "for 3 years until she disappeared." Eleanor leaned forward in her wheelchair. "You knew my mother well?" Sarah nodded, her expression solemn. "As well," as anyone, I think. Victoria was careful about who she let close, especially toward the end. Eleanor pulled Victoria's journal from her lap. Did you know about this? About what she was documenting? Sarah's eyes widened at the sight of the notebook. She kept it, she breathed. I wasn't sure. She looked up at Eleanor. Yes, I knew. I helped her gather some of the information. That's why I left Sullivan Industries after she disappeared. I was afraid I might be next. What happened to her? Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Is she... She couldn't finish. So the question. Sarah's expression softened. I don't know for certain, she admitted. But I don't think she's gone, not in the way most people assume. She leaned closer. About a week before she disappeared, Victoria gave me an envelope. She said if anything happened to her, I should wait 1 year and then mail it to a specific address. When the time came, I did as she asked. What was in the envelope? Jack asked. And who was it addressed to? I don't know what was inside, Sarah replied. Victoria sealed it, but the address was for a law firm in Boston, Blackwood and Myers. I did some digging after I mailed it. They specialize in witness protection and whistleblower cases. Eleanor's mind raced with possibilities. Could her mother have gone into hiding? Was she under some form of protection? I need to contact this law firm, she said decisively. Sarah shook her head. It's not that simple. They're notoriously discreet. And if your father has been monitoring them, any inquiry could put both you and potentially your mother at risk. She hesitated. There's something else you should know. After your mother disappeared, I tried to access her private email account. We had each other's passwords for work emergencies. The account had been wiped. Clean, but I managed to recover one draft message that hadn't been completely deleted. It was addressed to someone called Sparrow. All it said was, when the time comes, find Eleanor. The white horse will guide her. A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. She turned to look out the window at Spirit, now just a pale shape in the gathering darkness. The white horse, she repeated softly. She knew. How could she possibly know? About the horse? Mary asked, confusion evident in her voice. Sarah shook her head. I don't know, but Victoria was intuitive. Sometimes she seemed to know things before they happened. Eleanor's thoughts tumbled over each other. Her mother had left clues, had perhaps even orchestrated her escape in some way. But why wait 3 years? What had changed? My illness, she said suddenly, the pieces clicking into place. My father changed after I got sick. He became more controlling, more secretive. At first I thought he was just struggling to cope with my condition. But what if there was more to it? She looked at the journal in her hands. What if my illness somehow interfered with his plans? Sarah nodded slowly. The timing does align. Your father's more questionable business practices accelerated around the time you were diagnosed. Victoria noticed it too. Jack cleared his throat. Not to interrupt this detective work, but we need to consider immediate practical concerns. William's appeal on the news means he's stepping up his search. This farm isn't exactly hidden. If someone recognizes Eleanor, we need to move her, Ethan said from the doorway, where he had been silently listening. Somewhere unexpected. The lodge, Eleanor said firmly. My father's hunting lodge. It's the last place he'd look for me, and it might still contain my mother's evidence. Sarah frowned. It's risky. The property might be monitored. Not this time of year, Eleanor countered. My father only uses it during hunting season, which is months away. And any security system would be rudimentary. He values his privacy too much to have cameras or staff there regularly. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. It could work. I could take her tomorrow night, under cover of darkness. I'm coming too, Sarah said. I know what Victoria might have been looking for. I helped her compile some of the evidence. Mary looked worried. What about medical supplies? Eleanor needs certain medications, special equipment. I can manage for a few days without the extras, Eleanor assured her, and I have enough medication to last 2 weeks. She turned to Ethan. But I want to bring Spirit. I know it sounds strange, but I feel like he's connected to all of this somehow. Jack scratched his chin. Taking a horse to a secluded lodge isn't exactly inconspicuous, but I suppose if you arrive at night. Spirit is quiet, Eleanor said, and he could be useful if we need to leave quickly. The conversation continued late into the night, details being refined, contingencies planned. Through it all, Eleanor felt a growing sense of purpose. For the first time since her illness began, she wasn't just a passive recipient of others' decisions, she was actively shaping her own destiny. As the others finally retired to bed, Sarah lingered, helping Eleanor prepare for sleep. "Your mother would be proud of you," she said softly as she helped Eleanor into the bed. "She always said you had a mind like a steel trap." Eleanor caught Sarah's hand. "Do you think she's still alive? Truly?" Sarah's expression was careful. "I think Victoria Sullivan was too smart and too determined to be silenced easily, and I think she loved you too much to leave without making sure you would be safe eventually." She squeezed Eleanor's hand. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we start finding answers." After Sarah left, Eleanor lay awake, her mind too active for sleep. Outside her window, she could see the silhouette of Spirit against the moonlit paddock. "The white horse will guide her," she whispered, remembering her mother's cryptic message. Somehow, against all odds, that guidance had already begun. The journey ahead would be difficult, perhaps even dangerous, but for the first time in years, Eleanor felt the stirrings of hope. Her father had underestimated her, just as he had underestimated her mother. That mistake might ultimately be his undoing. Eleanor closed her eyes, finally surrendering to sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also the possibility of answers. And perhaps, if the stars aligned, a reunion she had long stopped believing possible. As she drifted off, her last conscious thought was of her mother's face, not as she appeared in the formal portraits that hung in their home, but as she had been in private moments, fierce, loving, and indomitable. Somewhere out there, Eleanor felt certain that woman still existed, and she was waiting for her daughter to find her. The fourth turning point arose when the mechanic decided to take her to his home, ignoring the possible consequences. The young man, an orphan since childhood, had raised himself and always detested injustice. He cared for her with what little he had, hiding her from the local media and the watchful eyes of those who still served her father. The journey to the hunting lodge began at dusk the following day. Jack had modified his horse trailer to accommodate not only Spirit, but also a secure space for Eleanor's wheelchair. Ethan drove Jack's truck with Sarah beside him in the front seat, while Eleanor remained hidden in the specially outfitted trailer with Spirit. The white horse seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, standing perfectly still during loading and making barely a sound as they traveled the winding back roads toward the remote property. "Turn here," Sarah directed, consulting a map illuminated by her phone's flashlight. "The access road should be about a quarter-mile ahead on the right." Ethan slowed the vehicle, peering through the darkness. "There's no sign." "There wouldn't be," Sarah replied. "William Sullivan values his privacy. The entrance is deliberately unmarked." Sure enough, they soon came upon a narrow dirt road, nearly hidden by overgrown bushes. Ethan maneuvered the truck and trailer carefully onto the rough track. The headlights illuminated a dense tunnel of trees that seemed to swallow them as they drove deeper into the forest. After nearly 2 miles of slow progress, the trees opened up to reveal a clearing. In the center stood the hunting lodge, a substantial 2-story structure built of heavy timber and stone. In the moonlight, it looked both imposing and abandoned. Ethan parked the truck a short distance from the main entrance and cut the engine. "It looks deserted," he observed, scanning the darkened windows. "Let's hope it stays that way," Sarah murmured, stepping out of the vehicle. Together, they unloaded Eleanor and her wheelchair, then led Spirit to a small paddock adjacent to what had once been a stable. "My father converted most of the stable into a garage for his ATVs," Eleanor explained, as Ethan secured the gate behind Spirit. "But he left this section for the occasional horse rental during hunting parties." The front door of the lodge was locked, but Eleanor directed them to a hidden key in a fake rock near the back entrance. "Some things never change," she commented, as Sarah retrieved the key. "My father believes in elaborate security systems for his business, but relies on the oldest tricks for his personal properties." The interior of the lodge was musty from disuse, but otherwise well maintained. Expensive furniture sat shrouded in white dust covers, Trophy heads of various animals stared glassily from the walls. "Charming decor," Ethan muttered, wheeling Eleanor into what had once been a grand living room. "My father enjoys displaying his conquests," Eleanor replied dryly, "human or animal." Sarah found the electrical panel and restored power to the lodge. Lights flickered on, revealing more of the masculine, hunting-themed interior. "We should keep the curtains closed," she advised, moving around the room to draw heavy drapes across the windows. "Even out here, a suddenly illuminated building might attract attention." Eleanor directed them to the library located at the rear of the first floor. Unlike the rest of the lodge, with its rustic outdoorsman aesthetic, this room reflected more refined tastes. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that appeared more decorative than read. A massive oak desk dominated one corner, while comfortable leather chairs were arranged near a smaller fireplace. "The hidden room is behind that section," Eleanor said, pointing to a bookcase along the eastern wall. "But I don't remember exactly how to open it. My mother showed me only once, years ago." The 3 of them approached the bookcase, examining it carefully. "Look for anything unusual," Sarah suggested. "A book that doesn't match the others, or one that's positioned differently." Ethan ran his hands along the wooden framework. "Or a hidden switch or lever. These old houses often had mechanical releases." Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to recall the details of that long-ago visit. She had been only 5, still able to walk, excited to be included in what her mother called their special adventure. What had Victoria done? She had approached the bookcase, reached for something. "Third shelf from the bottom," Eleanor said suddenly, her eyes snapping open. There was a green book with gold lettering. She pulled it partway out, but it didn't come all the way. It triggered something. Sarah scanned the shelf Eleanor indicated. "This one?" she asked, pointing to a dark green volume. Eleanor shook her head. No, it was brighter. Emerald green. Ethan moved along the shelf, then stopped. "Here," he said, pulling out a book that matched Eleanor's description. As he described, the book moved only partially, before catching on something. A soft click sounded, and a section of the bookcase swung inward several inches. "You did it!" Sarah exclaimed, helping Ethan pull the concealed door wider. Beyond lay a small room, perhaps 10 feet square. Unlike the rest of the lodge, this space contained modern furnishings. A metal desk with a locked computer, filing cabinets, and a wall covered in what appeared to be photographs and documents connected by red string. "My mother's investigation room." Eleanor breathed as Ethan wheeled her inside. Sarah flipped a light switch, illuminating the space. Dust covered everything, but otherwise the room appeared untouched, a time capsule preserving Victoria Sullivan's final work. "He never found it," Sarah said wonderingly. "All this time her evidence was here, hidden in plain sight." Eleanor approached the wall of connected documents. At the center was a photograph of her father, shaking hands with a man she didn't recognize. From this central image, red strings led to other photos, documents, and handwritten notes. "It's a conspiracy map," Ethan observed. "Your mother was tracking connections." Sarah was already examining the filing cabinets, which proved to be unlocked. "Financial records," she reported, flipping through folders. "Bank statements, property deeds, incorporation documents for companies I've never heard of." Eleanor moved to the desk, trying drawers until she found one that was locked. "We need to find a key," she said. Ethan glanced around the room. "Check the books on that small shelf," he suggested. "A hidden room inside a bookcase. It would be fitting to hide a key in a book." Sarah began pulling books from the shelf, checking inside covers and flipping through pages. On her 5th attempt, a copy of Treasure Island, a small brass key fell out. "Appropriate choice," she commented, handing the key to Eleanor. The locked drawer slid open smoothly, revealing a sealed manila envelope with "For Eleanor" written across it in Victoria's distinctive handwriting. Underneath lay a leather-bound journal similar to the one Eleanor already possessed, but newer. With trembling hands, Eleanor opened the envelope first. Inside was a letter, dated just days before Victoria's disappearance. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, "if you are reading this, then events have unfolded as I feared they might. I've discovered things about your father's business dealings that have put me in danger. By the time you find this, I will have had to make an impossible choice: remain with you and risk both our lives, or secure evidence and seek protection elsewhere. Please know that whatever has happened, leaving you was the most painful decision I have ever made. I have arranged certain safeguards to watch over you from afar. When the time is right, you will find your way to freedom, and perhaps back to me. The evidence in this room documents your father's involvement in environmental violations, tax fraud, and bribery of public officials. But most damning is his connection to Evergreen Solutions, a shell company he created to dispose of industrial waste illegally. This company is directly linked to the contamination of groundwater in 3 counties, including the area where our home is located. I believe this contamination may be connected to your illness, though I cannot yet prove it. William knows this too, which is why he has gone to such lengths to keep you isolated and your medical care private. Trust Sarah Chen if she is still in the picture. She knows more than she realizes. And remember, strength is not in the legs but in the soul. All my love, always, Mom. Eleanor looked up from the letter, tears streaming down her face. She thinks my illness was caused by my father's company, she whispered, that he knew and covered it up. Sarah's expression was grim. That would explain his increasing paranoia about your public appearances and medical care. If word got out that his own daughter had been affected by his illegal dumping, it would destroy him, Ethan finished, both legally and in terms of public opinion. Eleanor turned to the journal, flipping through pages filled with Victoria's meticulous notes. She tracked the spread of similar neurological symptoms across the region, she said, scanning the entries. Children from 3 different school districts, all supplied by the same water source, a source that Evergreen Solutions had testing rights for. Sarah was examining the wall of connected evidence. "Look at this," she called, pointing to a document partially hidden behind others. "Medical records for a Dr. Thomas Reynolds. He was your neurologist, wasn't he?" Eleanor nodded. "He diagnosed my condition, but my father switched doctors about a year later, said Dr. Reynolds was pursuing experimental treatments he didn't approve of." Sarah carefully removed the document. "According to this, Dr. Reynolds died in a boating accident 6 months after he was removed from your case. The ETA official report ruled it an accident, but your mother had circled several inconsistencies in the investigation. The implications hung heavily in the air." "My father silenced him," Eleanor said flatly, "because he was getting too close to the truth about the contamination." Ethan had been examining the computer. "This might contain even more evidence, but we'd need the password." Eleanor thought for a moment. "Try Sparrow," she suggested, remembering the name from her mother's draft email. Sarah typed it in, but the computer remained locked. "What about Whitehorse?" Ethan suggested. Again, no success. Eleanor closed her eyes, thinking about her mother. What had been important to her? What symbols she had valued? "Try Strength in Soul," she said finally. Sarah typed the phrase and the computer screen came to life. "She wanted you to find this," Sarah said softly. "She left breadcrumbs she knew only you would follow." For the next several hours, they combed through the digital evidence Victoria had compiled. There were emails between William Sullivan and various officials, detailed accounting records showing money funneled to shell companies, and environmental testing results that had been altered before submission to regulatory agencies. Most disturbing were the medical records Victoria had collected. Dozens of cases of children and adults with unexplained neurological symptoms, all living in areas serviced by water sources near William's industrial plants. "This is enough to put him away for decades," Ethan said, staring at the screen, "and to bankrupt Sullivan Industries with lawsuits. But it doesn't tell us where my mother is now," Eleanor pointed out, frustration evident in her voice. She must have taken copies of this evidence with her when she disappeared. So why hasn't she come forward? Why hasn't she contacted me? Sarah had been unusually quiet for the past hour, studying a particular set of documents with intense concentration. "I think I might know," she said finally. "These bank records show regular payments to a company called Phoenix Sanctuary. It's listed as a wellness retreat in northern Vermont, but the address doesn't match any known facility." She looked up. and the payments began exactly 1 month after Victoria disappeared. Eleanor's pulse quickened. "You think she's there, at this Phoenix place?" "It's possible," Sarah said cautiously, "or it could be another shell company, but it's our best lead." Ethan checked his watch. "It's nearly 3 in the morning. We should get some rest and figure out our next move in the daylight." Eleanor shook her head. "We might not have that luxury. Now that we've accessed this room and turned on the computer, we've potentially triggered something. My father is paranoid. He might have monitoring systems we're not aware of." As if confirming her fears, the distant sound of vehicles on the access road reached them. Ethan moved quickly to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. 2 SUVs, he reported tensely, coming up the drive. Sarah began gathering the most crucial documents. "We need to go, now." "There's a back exit through the kitchen," Eleanor directed. "It leads to a path that connects with the stable." Ethan quickly wheeled Eleanor out of the hidden room, while Sarah sealed it shut behind them. They moved swiftly through the lodge, turning off lights as they went. In the kitchen, Ethan found the door Eleanor had mentioned. Outside, the night was still and dark, with only a sliver of moon providing illumination. "The paddock is about 50 yards that way," Eleanor whispered, pointing. "If we can get to Spirit." They had barely made it halfway when floodlights suddenly illuminated the yard. A man's voice called out, "Stop right there." Ethan froze, placing himself protectively in front of Eleanor's wheelchair. Sarah stepped forward, her posture defiant. "Mr. Sullivan," she said coldly, "still hiding in the shadows while others do your dirty work?" William Sullivan emerged from behind the floodlights, flanked by 2 men who were clearly security personnel. He looked much as Eleanor remembered, tall, distinguished, with silver-streaked dark hair and a face that revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Ms. Chen," he acknowledged with a slight nod, "I might have known you'd be involved." His gaze shifted to his daughter. "Eleanor, you've caused quite a stir disappearing like that. I've been worried sick." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Have you, father? I find that hard to believe considering you left me in the forest to perish." William's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I see you've been listening to dramatic tales. I left you in the care of a specialist facility. When I returned to check on you, you had wandered off. We've been searching frantically." His lie was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment Eleanor almost doubted her own memories. But then she remembered the cold determination in his eyes as he had abandoned her in the forest, and her resolve hardened. "We know everything," she said clearly, "about Evergreen Solutions, about the contamination, about what really happened to Dr. Reynolds." For the first time, William's composure slipped. His face paled slightly in the harsh light. "I don't know what you think you've discovered, but you're clearly confused. Your condition sometimes affects your cognitive function. Your doctors have documented this." "My condition that your company caused," Eleanor shot back, "along with the illnesses of dozens of other children. We have the evidence, father. Mother's evidence." At the mention of Victoria, William's expression turned dangerous. "Your mother was unwell," he said flatly. "Paranoid, delusional, making wild accusations without proof." "We have the proof," Sarah interjected, "and copies have already been sent to multiple secure locations. If anything happens to any of us, that information goes public immediately." It was a bluff, but a necessary one. William studied them, calculation evident in his gaze. "Come back to the house, Eleanor," he said finally, his tone softening. "Whatever you think you know, we can discuss it privately. As a family." Eleanor almost laughed. "We haven't been a family since you drove Mother away. Or did you do something worse to her?" Before William could respond, a commotion from the paddock drew everyone's attention. Spirit had somehow freed himself and was galloping toward them, his white coat gleaming ghostly in the floodlights. He reared dramatically as he reached them, placing himself between Eleanor and her father. The security men stepped back, startled by the horse's sudden appearance. In that moment of confusion, Ethan moved. With surprising strength, he lifted Eleanor from her wheelchair and placed her on Spirit's back. "Go!" he shouted to Sarah, who was already running toward the truck and trailer. William lunged forward, but Spirit kicked out, forcing him back. "Eleanor!" William called, his voice now openly angry. "Don't be a fool! You can't survive out there!" Eleanor looked down at her, farther from Spirit's back, feeling a strange sense of power despite her physical limitations. "Watch me," she said simply, before urging Spirit toward the access road, where Sarah had started the truck's engine. Behind them, William's shouts faded as they disappeared into the darkness, the white horse carrying Eleanor to the next chapter of her journey, and possibly to the mother she had thought lost forever. The fifth twist came with the discovery of a hidden diary, which the young man found among the few belongings of the girl. In it, there were detailed accounts of what happened inside the mansion. Illicit financial schemes, silent threats to the staff, and the disappearance of the mother under suspicious circumstances. The narrow escape from the hunting lodge had left them all shaken. Sarah drove with focused intensity, taking back roads and avoiding main highways as they made their way north toward Vermont. In the trailer, Ethan helped secure Eleanor on a makeshift bed of blankets beside Spirit, who stood watchful and calm despite the vehicle's movement. "Your father will have people looking for us," Ethan said, checking Eleanor's position to ensure she wouldn't be jostled too severely by the rough roads. "Police, private security, maybe even state troopers if he has the connections I suspect he does." Eleanor nodded, her face pale but determined. "He'll use my disability to paint me as confused, incompetent to make my own decisions. It's what he's been building toward for years, isolating me, limiting my contact with outsiders, controlling my medical care, all to ensure no one would believe me if I ever discovered the truth." Ethan's expression hardened. "Well, he didn't count on you having allies or evidence." He patted the messenger bag containing the most damning documents from Victoria's hidden room, along with a flash drive of digital files. "And he certainly didn't count on Spirit." The white horse nickered softly at the mention of his name, nudging Eleanor's shoulder gently. She smiled, reaching up to stroke his velvet muzzle. "I still don't understand how my mother knew about him," she mused. "Her note mentioned a white horse guiding me, but Spirit didn't appear until years after she disappeared." "Some things defy logical explanation," Ethan said quietly. "My grandmother would have called it providence." The truck slowed as Sarah navigated a particularly rough stretch of road. Through the small window connecting to the cab, she called back, "We're about 20 miles from the Vermont border. Once we cross, we should be able to find a place to rest for a few hours." Eleanor checked her watch. Nearly 5 a.m. Dawn would break soon. "We need to contact Phoenix Sanctuary," she said, "but carefully. If it really is where my mother is being kept, we can't alert my father's people." Sarah nodded. "I have a burner phone. We'll use that to make initial contact, pose as potential clients looking for information." They crossed into Vermont as the first light of dawn broke over the Green Mountains. Sarah found a small motel off the beaten path, the kind of place that accepted cash and asked few questions. The owner, an elderly woman with kind eyes, didn't blink at their unusual group or the horse trailer in her parking lot. "My nephew keeps horses," she said. When Sarah expressed concern about Spirit, "There's a small paddock out back you can use, no extra charge." The woman introduced herself only as May and showed them to a ground floor room with 2 beds and a pull-out couch. "Breakfast is at 8, but I can bring something earlier if you need it," she offered. Ethan thanked her, carrying Eleanor inside while Sarah took care of Spirit. Once they were settled, Sarah used the burner phone to call the number associated with Phoenix Sanctuary. After a brief conversation, she returned to the others, her expression thoughtful. "It's definitely some kind of facility," she reported. The woman who answered was professional but guarded. "They offer specialized care for individuals requiring privacy and protection. When I asked about visiting policies, she said they're extremely restricted, approved contacts only, with advance notice." Eleanor's heart raced. That sounds like it could be a legitimate protection facility, or a very exclusive private prison, Ethan pointed out grimly. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. "There's something else. When I mentioned I was interested in their services for a family member with a rare neurological condition, the woman hesitated, then said they have extensive experience with similar cases." She suggested I send medical records for review before proceeding further. Eleanor and Ethan exchanged glances. It could be a coincidence, Ethan said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe that. Or it could be that they specialize in cases like yours, people affected by the contamination. We need to see this place, Eleanor decided, but we can't just show up at the front door. Not when my father might have people watching it. Sarah nodded. I managed to get the location. It's about 50 miles north of here, in a remote area near the Canadian border. Heavily wooded, minimal. The neighbors. She unfolded a map she'd purchased at the motel office. The receptionist mentioned they're situated on a large property with security checkpoints on the access road. Ethan studied the map. But look here, there's a state forest that borders the property on the western edge. If we approach from that direction, through the woods, we could bypass their security, Sarah finished, at least long enough to observe the facility and determine if it's where Victoria might be. Eleanor felt a surge of hope mixed with trepidation. If my mother is there, she's been there for 3 years. Why hasn't she tried to contact me or gone public with the evidence? Your father's reach is extensive, Sarah reminded her. He might have threatened you to keep her silent. Or perhaps she's been trying to contact you in ways you haven't recognized. Eleanor thought of Spirit, appearing mysteriously at exactly the moment she needed him. Had that been coincidence or something more? They rested for a few hours, taking turns keeping watch. By mid-afternoon, they were on the road again, heading toward the coordinates of Phoenix Sanctuary. The terrain grew increasingly remote and mountainous. Eventually, Sarah turned onto a logging road that, according to the map, would take them within a mile of the facility's western boundary. We'll have to go the rest of the way on foot, she said, parking the truck in a clearing sheltered by pines. Or, she glanced meaningfully at Spirit. Eleanor understood immediately. Spirit can carry me. He's proven he can handle forest terrain. Ethan looked concerned. It's risky. If you fall... I won't, Eleanor said with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Spirit won't let me fall. They transferred Eleanor to the white horse's back, securing her as best they could with improvised straps. Sarah packed essential supplies in a backpack, including water, the burner phone, and the evidence from the hunting lodge. Ethan helped Eleanor adjust her position on Spirit, then stepped back, studying their unusual tableau. Your mother would be proud, he said softly. Whatever happens next, remember that. The journey through the forest was slow and careful. Spirit picked his way delicately over fallen logs and around dense underbrush, seeming to understand the need for both silence and stability. Ethan walked ahead, checking for obstacles, while Sarah followed behind, occasionally consulting a compass and the map. As the afternoon waned, the forest thinned slightly, and through the trees they caught glimpses of a large modern structure built of glass and stone. That must be it, Sarah whispered, moving closer to Eleanor. Phoenix Sanctuary. They found a vantage point that offered a clear view while keeping them concealed among the trees. The facility was smaller than Eleanor had imagined, more like a luxury residence than an institution. Expansive windows looked out over manicured grounds. A few people in casual clothing walked along stone paths or sat in a glass-enclosed atrium. From their distance, it was impossible to identify individuals, but the atmosphere seemed peaceful, almost resort-like. It doesn't look like a prison, Ethan observed, more like an exclusive retreat. The security is subtle but present, Sarah pointed out, indicating cameras mounted discreetly in trees and motion sensors along the perimeter. They're serious about privacy. Eleanor studied the building intently, her heart pounding. Could her mother really be inside? After 3 years of believing she might never see Victoria again, the possibility of reunion seemed almost too much to hope for. We need to get closer, she decided. Find a way to see who's inside without triggering their security. As if in response to her words, Spirit began moving forward, picking his way carefully toward the edge of the tree line. Wait, Ethan hissed. But the horse continued his deliberate progress. Eleanor leaned close to Spirit's neck, trusting him in a way she couldn't fully explain. They emerged from the forest at a point where the manicured grounds met the wild growth of the woods. From this position, they had a clearer view of the atrium, where several residents were gathered for what appeared to be afternoon tea. Eleanor scanned the faces anxiously, looking for any sign of her mother, and then she saw her. Seated near a window, a book open on her lap, was Victoria Sullivan. Her hair, once as dark as Eleanor's, now showed streaks of premature silver, and her face looked thinner than Eleanor remembered. But it was unmistakably her mother, alive and apparently well. "Mom," Eleanor whispered, tears filling her eyes. "She's really here." The emotional impact of seeing her mother after so long overwhelmed her. Without thinking, Eleanor urged Spirit forward, moving beyond the safety of the tree line and into the open. A security alarm immediately sounded, lights flashing around. The perimeter of the property. Inside the atrium, people looked up in alarm. Victoria turned toward the commotion, her book falling forgotten to the floor as she spotted the white horse and its rider. Their eyes met across the distance. Mother and daughter, separated for 3 years, connected in an instant of recognition that transcended words. Victoria was on her feet immediately, running toward the doors that led to the grounds, heedless of the security personnel now converging from multiple directions. Eleanor urged Spirit forward, the white horse breaking into a canter across the manicured lawn. Behind them, Sarah and Ethan emerged from the forest as well, running to keep up. Security guards moved to intercept them, but they hesitated at the unusual sight of a young woman on a white horse, determination etched on her face. Victoria reached the lawn just as Eleanor and Spirit approached. "Eleanor," she cried, her voice carrying across the distance that still separated them, "my darling girl." Spirit slowed as they neared Victoria, allowing the woman to reach up and touch her daughter's hand. Tears streamed down both their faces as their fingers intertwined. "You found me," Victoria said wonderingly. "The white horse. Just as I dreamed." Before Eleanor could respond, security personnel surrounded them. "Mrs. Sullivan," one of them said respectfully but firmly, "you know the protocols, no unauthorized visitors." Victoria straightened, her expression changing from joy to steel in an instant. "This is my daughter," she said, in a tone that brooked no argument. "The daughter I was promised would be protected as part of my arrangement." She turned to the lead security officer. "Call Director Blackwood immediately. Tell her Victoria Sullivan's daughter has arrived, and that we have evidence that changes everything." The next hours passed in a blur for Eleanor. She was brought inside the facility, which she learned was indeed a protective residence for whistleblowers and others requiring security, while legal cases were prepared. Victoria had been there since her disappearance, working with federal investigators to build a case against William Sullivan and his network of corrupt officials and business partners. "I wanted to contact you," Victoria explained as they sat in her private quarters, hands clasped tightly. "Every day was agony knowing you were still in his care, but they convinced me that any attempt to reach you would put you in greater danger. William had made it clear that if I ever went public with what I knew, you would suffer the consequences." Eleanor nodded, understanding at last. "He used me as leverage to keep you silent, and to keep me from seeking treatment for you," Victoria added, her expression pained. "I had found specialists who believed your condition might be partially reversible with aggressive therapy, but William blocked every attempt. He couldn't risk doctors discovering the connection between your symptoms and the contamination." Sarah and Ethan had joined them, along with a stern-looking woman introduced as Director Blackwood of the Witness Protection Program. "The evidence you've brought changes our timeline considerably," Director Blackwood explained, examining the documents from the hunting lodge. "We've been building our case methodically, but this provides the direct link to the contamination that we've been missing." Victoria squeezed Eleanor's hand. "We can move forward now. William won't be able to bury this any longer." "But he's still free," Eleanor pointed out, "and powerful. He'll fight back with everything he has." Director Blackwood nodded grimly. "Which is why we need to move quickly. Our contacts in the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Justice are standing by. With this new evidence, we can secure warrants by morning." Ethan, who had been quiet for some time, spoke up. "What about Eleanor's condition? You mentioned specialists who thought it might be treatable." Victoria's expression brightened. "Yes, there's a neurological team in Boston that has had success with similar cases. Part of my agreement here was that once William was charged, Eleanor would receive the best possible care. She turned to her daughter. It may not restore full function, but they believe significant improvement is possible. For Eleanor, who had long ago accepted her limitations as permanent, this news was almost as overwhelming as finding her mother alive. "I never dared hope," she whispered. As evening fell, plans were made. Eleanor would remain at Phoenix Sanctuary with her mother while the legal proceedings were initiated. Sarah, with her journalism background, would work with federal investigators to prepare the public narrative. Ethan would return to Meadowbrook to update the Millers and secure their silence until the case became public. "And Spirit?" Eleanor asked, concerned for the white horse that had become so central to her journey. Victoria smiled, touching her daughter's cheek gently. "The white horse was no accident, Eleanor. 3 years ago, when I was making arrangements to go into protection, I had a vivid, recurring dream, a vision of you being guided to safety by a white horse. It seemed like a symbol, nothing more. But I mentioned it to my contact at Blackwood and Myers." She glanced at the director. "Tell her." Director Blackwood looked slightly uncomfortable, as if ventures into the inexplicable were outside her professional comfort zone. "We don't typically deal in unconventional methods, but in high-risk situations we sometimes employ what we call pattern disruption techniques. In this case, when we received word through our surveillance that William had taken you to the forest, yes, we've been watching, though not closely enough it seems, one of our agents released a white horse from a nearby property. The animal had been trained for search and rescue operations. We hoped it might find you, or at least create enough disruption to alert local authorities to search the area." Eleanor stared at them in amazement. "You planned this? You sent Spirit to find me?" Victoria shook her head. "We created the possibility. What happened next, the bond you formed with the horse, the way he guided you to safety and eventually to me, that was beyond anything we could have orchestrated." As night fell over Phoenix Sanctuary, Eleanor found herself on the facility's enclosed patio, watching stars appear in the Vermont sky. Spirit had been brought to the property's small stable, where he was being treated like royalty by staff who had heard the remarkable story of his role in the day's events. Victoria joined her daughter, wrapping a warm blanket around Eleanor's shoulders. "Tomorrow will bring challenges," she said softly. "William won't surrender his empire without a fight. But for tonight, let's just be grateful for this moment." Eleanor nodded, leaning her head against her mother's shoulder. "For years, I thought you had abandoned me," she admitted. "Even after I found your journal and understood what you were investigating, part of me couldn't forgive your leaving." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "It was the hardest choice I've ever made. Every day without you felt like walking through the world with half my heart missing." She took Eleanor's hand. "But I never stopped working to bring us back together and to bring your father to justice." Eleanor thought about the journey that had led her here, from the forest where her father had abandoned her to this moment of reunion with her mother. She thought about Spirit, the unlikely guardian who had appeared when she needed him most, and she thought about Ethan and Sarah, who had risked everything to help a girl they barely knew. "Strength isn't in the legs," she murmured, remembering Martha's words. "It's in the soul." Victoria smiled, recognizing the phrase. "Martha told you that? She was a good woman. I'm glad she was there for you when I couldn't be." "She slipped me the wooden horse figurine," Eleanor explained, "the day Father took me to the forest. It gave me hope when I had none left." Victoria nodded, understanding. "Small acts of kindness can sustain us through our darkest moments." She gazed out at the stars. "When this is over, when William has faced justice and you've begun treatment, we'll build a new life, somewhere peaceful with room for Spirit to run free." Eleanor smiled at the image. "I'd like that." The sixth turning point had been an ethical conflict. Exposing the powerful businessman would put the girl at risk again. Or would it be her only chance for definitive protection? Now that question had been answered. With her mother beside her and the evidence secure, Eleanor knew the path forward would not be easy, but it would lead toward justice and healing. As dawn broke over Phoenix Sanctuary the next morning, federal agents were already moving to execute search warrants at Sullivan Industries and the family estate. William Sullivan was taken into custody as he attempted to board a private jet. his expression of shock captured by news cameras for the world to see. In the days that followed, the story broke nationally. A powerful industrialist charged with environmental crimes that had sickened dozens, including his own daughter. A brave whistleblower mother who had sacrificed everything to gather evidence. And most compellingly to the public imagination, a young girl and a white horse who had overcome impossible odds to bring truth to light. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in physical therapy, her hands gripping parallel bars as she carefully, painfully, took her first assisted steps in 5 years. The treatment pioneered by the Boston specialists had yielded promising results. Not a miracle cure, but significant improvement in nerve function and muscle response. Victoria watched from nearby, pride and love illuminating her face. Through the window, Spirit grazed in a small paddock. The white horse had become something of a celebrity, featured in news stories about Eleanor's journey. More importantly, he had become family, a permanent reminder that hope can appear in the most unexpected forms. Ethan visited regularly, having accepted a position with the environmental engineering firm now tasked with cleanup of the contaminated sites. Sarah had returned to journalism with a renewed purpose, her coverage of the Sullivan case earning her national recognition and a book deal. And the Millers, Jack and Mary, had become extended family, their farm a weekend sanctuary where Eleanor continued to regain strength and confidence. As for William Sullivan, his empire had crumbled. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he had accepted a plea deal that would keep him imprisoned for decades. The family fortune, once tainted by corruption, was now being used to establish a foundation for environmental protection and support for victims of industrial contamination. Eleanor took another step, then another, sweat beading on her forehead from the effort. Each movement was a victory, hard-won and precious. "Keep going," Victoria encouraged. "You're doing beautifully." Eleanor paused, catching her breath. Through the window, she saw Spirit lift his head as if sensing her attention. The white horse nickered softly, his gaze meeting hers across the distance. In that moment, Eleanor felt the connection that had guided her from abandonment to reunion, from despair to hope. "I am," she agreed, turning back to the parallel bars with renewed determination. "And I won't stop now."